Okay, it appears that we're now streaming live on YouTube. So welcome to the meeting of the Subdivision Authority, the electronic meeting, I'll note, for Tuesday, October the 13th, 2020. There's only one matter before the Subdivision Authority today. That's the ASP 2020-019, the subdivision of Lot 1, Block 3, Plan 041-1062, which is Silvertip Block 3, in order to create 18 lots for commercial resort accommodation. Looking to the agenda as presented, are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Looking to the minutes of the Tuesday, August 25th meeting of the Subdivision Authority, are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. We're moving on now to the presentation by administration. Ms. Wojtenko.
Thank you. Good morning. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving weekend. So I've got a presentation here. I'm going to screen share with you. So I'm going to run through this whole application fairly quickly. I do seem to be having a little bit of unstable internet this morning. So if something happens, can you just give me a wave or something that you're not able to hear me?
Yes, we can't hear you.
Connection maybe put out, if I can get that. Me. Am I back on?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm in Canmore and I've just had awful internet this morning. So I'll try.
Okay.
Great. So this is Subdivision 2019-010 and it's for Block 3 in Silvertip. And our recommendation today is that the Subdivision Authority approves the application subject to a number of conditions set out in Schedule A. This is the land we're talking about. It is a portion of Lot 1, Block 3. It is a bit of a funny shape here that's shown in the key plan in yellow. That's the area, and I'll describe how that area got to be the subdivision area in a moment. So the application is for 17 resort accommodation lots and 1 resort amenity lot. And I'm going to use a pointer here for everybody. So this is lot 14. This is the spa lot. The remainder of these smaller lots are the 17 resort accommodation lots. There's also some dedication of public road. So this new road here is Silvertip Village Lane, which is proposed to be dedicated as a roadway. And there's also a portion of Silvertip Trail, which is here, which is the existing road up to the clubhouse. It is currently not a public road. It has a utility right-of-way access and utility and access right-of-way on it. So the town has access to our water up here, our reservoir, and for public access as well. And so they would like this road to become public instead of private. So the area of Block 3 that they're proposing to subdivide is on a bit of a bench here. This is the bench. But there's quite steep slopes below the bench and above the bench. Well, sorry, there's a gully here. So this gully runs down that way. Next one. So this kind of topography means that there will be quite a bit of extensive road cuts and fills required. And this is some preliminary engineering, which showing just the extent of how much cut. So for example, this deep red is showing cut above a meter. And in some areas, this would need to be cut down by 4 meters or more. The green shows some of the area of fill. So like deeper areas of fill here, so up to 2 meters.
Ms. Wojtenko, do you mind if we interrupt with questions? Would you rather we just hold them?
I don't mind interruptions with questions as long as it's related specifically to this part of the presentation. I may cover things later, which would answer a question, but I don't mind answering a question.
I don't want to interrupt your flow, but probably we'll move on from this. And I'm just curious if there's anywhere else in Canmore that we would be able to be familiar with that have similar cuts as being suggested here.
Yeah, so for example, the latest phase 3 of Stewart Creek had quite extensive grading done to it.
So similar to that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Although slightly different, Stewart Creek phase 3, they did grade the lots as well. This will have less grading of the lots. So it may be more comparable to, for example, Mountains Reach in Silvertip, where the road was graded, but the lots are quite steep. Sometimes resulting in grading of lots that are 33%, which is quite steep of a lot. So the soils, we did get a soil report, which was provided for you. There are numerous recommendations in the geotechnical report for how to deal with the types of soils that are here and the steep grades. So we would require these methods be used at construction management plan for that type of utility installation. And we would require that at detailed subdivision and infrastructure design. The stormwater that they provided, the preliminary concepts are adequate. You can see the catchments, how they've proposed to catch stormwater and bring it down here into Silvertip Trail. And there's both overland, so they've got some ponds here to collect in that gully. And it would eventually go down to Silvertip Trail. At the bottom, there is the ponds that we have. So from preliminary investigations, we understand that the stormwater management is satisfactory and would need more detailed design if this gets approved. For flooding and undermining, there is no steep creek hazard or valley bottom flood hazard here, and there's also no undermining hazard. The one thing that was identified in the geotechnical report is that there is concern with erosion and slope failure. So the slope stability analysis recommends that there are either development setbacks. You can either move lot lines or you can register a restrictive covenant on the title of that land to ensure that that buildings don't go in that development setback and that the land is maintained. So for example, a restrictive covenant would say, maintain the vegetation there, maintain.
You just froze again, Tracy.
I just sent her a message to let her know.
Yeah, this won't work very well. Is Ms. Smithers, are you listening?
Yes, I am.
I'm just wondering if we could
All right, kicked me out of Zoom. I'm back on.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Jane, if it would be possible for you to drive Tracy's presentation for her so that she can take herself off of video, and maybe just with the audio, it won't be as hard on her internet connection. And then Jane or Tracy, you could just when to advance the slides. Would that work?
Yeah, if Jane can log on to the G Drive.
I think I can. It might take me a minute or so here.
Or I can email it to you. I think I have it in email as well.
I'm just wondering if there's any value in adjourning for half an hour. And Tracy, is there any chance you could come down to the Civic Center to log on and give your presentation here? Because I think the connection is pretty dependable here.
We could do that, but I know you have a meeting set for 11 o'clock. By the time I get down to the Civic Center and everything's running, we may not have time for the meeting.
Well, we would have to postpone that meeting or push it back. We have more time in the afternoon. Regardless, if you think you have it handled, we can try, but it's not going to work if we keep.
Email it to me, Tracy?
Pardon
Sorry,
me?
Jane?
Oh, do you want to try to email it to me? It'd probably be faster.
Okay.
Okay, why don't we adjourn for even just 10 minutes, if I can suggest that, and then we'll figure this out. And my apologies to the applicants. This is clearly not expected. But yeah, I would suggest if we adjourn for 10 minutes, and then I'll work with my team to get this up and running.
Right, so it's a 9:15. I'll move that the subdivision authority adjourn for 10 minutes to 9:25. Those in favor? Approved. So we will take 10 minutes here.
Jane, I just emailed it to you.
Okay, perfect. Just give me 1 second here.
And Jane, you're just in the anthracite, right? Do you want me to head over there and see if I can help you out, or are you good?
You can head over if you like. But I
Okay.
think I just gotta, let's see.
Can I just ask that we maybe message over Teams because we're still live, and I'm just going to throw up a slideshow and have everyone on mute.
Okay, so I've got hers up. So basically all I have to do is just screen share this now, right? I
Can
don't
you just
normally.
mute yourself? looks like we're ready to go.
Okay, so we have the technology sorted out.
Yeah, it looks like Jane's able to share.
Okay, and everybody is still in the meeting that was there 10 minutes ago.
We've got everybody here.
Okay, and Ms. Wojtenko, if you're ready to go, I'll move that the meeting readjourn. Those in favor? Opposed, and we're back on.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. But where was I before I cut out? I can't tell when it.
Tracy, you were on the slide that's on the screen now, and I'll ask you to turn your video off because that'll probably make your internet less glitchy.
Okay, I will try that. Okay. So yeah, there'll be some oh, and Jane, can you go to the previous slide just so I can see that was again? And one, okay, now forward. And forward. And forward, please. Right here, I was here at stormwater management. Stormwater, so they have considered stormwater management from a perspective of needing overland drainage and catchment areas. Next slide, Jane. And this is the overland drainage. So there will be some small ponds. Where those are is a gully feature. So there will be some overland drainage, either a bridge or a culvert will be required there. And that's the important thing to note later when I talk about a bridge or a culvert. So that would be determined at detailed design. Next slide, please, Jane. There is no steep creek or valley bottom flood hazard, and there is no undermining hazard. Next slide. But there is the hazard of erosion and steep slopes. And so the geotechnical report recommends development setbacks from the steep slopes and erosion control. And this will be maintained through a restrictive covenant that must be registered on the title of the lots that have the steep slope concerns. Next slide, please, Jane. And so this is the map taken from the geotechnical report showing what lots may need restrictive covenant on them. At detailed design, if the reports show a different setback, at final before endorsement, we would need to register the covenant as per the most updated report. Next slide, please. We need to determine if there's adequate accessibility to a road. So as I mentioned before, there's two roads that need to be created or dedicated. So first one is the acceptance of the private road to public road, and that's that portion of Silvertip Trail, which runs from Silvertip Road up to the golf course clubhouse, and construction of the new public road, which has been proposed name Silvertip Village Lane. Next slide, please. So the Silvertip Trail portion is at the top, and the Silvertip Village Lane is the north-south road that comes off and into the subdivision itself. Next slide, please, Jane. And so as a condition of subdivision, the town would require Silvertip Trail to be at the current EDC standards. And so any upgrades that are required to this road have to be taken by the developer prior to acceptance or endorsement of the plan of subdivision or of the road plan. Next slide, please, Jane. And Silvertip Village Lane, what's been being proposed and is shown here on the slide by the applicant does not meet our current EDCG standard for a local road. So we have put forward a number of different things. And so what doesn't meet here is they've only shown us a sidewalk on one side, which is asphalt. Typically we have sidewalks on both sides and they are concrete. The shallow utilities would not be underneath the sidewalk. And a couple other minor differences. So you go to the next slide, please, Jane. So our recommendation for road design instead is what's called the collector standard to the bridge or the culvert. And the bridge or the culvert is where I was saying at that big elbow in the road. And so what we would ask is for that they would construct an interim design until the final road is known. There will be connections and driveways and other roads that come off that upper part, and we don't want the road to be finalized before we know what the full impact of other traffic going onto that road will be. So it would be an interim design. And then from the bridge culvert to the end of the cul-de-sac, we are requesting instead a sidewalk on the entire south side, and that would be concrete, and a sidewalk in front of the 4 lots on the north side. Next slide, please, Jane. So this is what it would look like. So the first section would be the collector, and it would be built to an interim standard. And the horizontal section would be the modified local. And so slightly different than what the applicant has applied for. Next slide, please, Jane. Emergency access isn't required at this time because of the density and the type of development. And so there's also a requirement that at future stages, there will need to be water looping. And so administration is proposing to the applicant that the emergency access should not be constructed at this time, and that it would be constructed at future subdivision phases when the water looping is constructed. Next slide, please, Jane. And this is the conceptual design of the water. So you can see it's mostly in the roadway. However, it does deviate from the roadway and go down into Silvertip Trail. We would require the registration of utility right-of-way to make this work. And so we would determine what that alignment would be at detailed design, but there is adequate water. Next slide, please, Jane. There's also adequate sanitary sewer. The sewer line follows the water line and would also need to be partly in a URW. And we would need to look at detailed design should this get approved. Next slide. And solid waste. We are not requiring solid waste bins as it's been proposed by the applicant. That solid waste would be managed by the rental management company or the strata on site, similar to other hotels. So other considerations that we take into account at subdivision is, does this conform with the MDP? And it is consistent with the MDP for resort center commercial policies. Next slide. It is consistent with the ASP policy of the Silvertip area structure plan. In particular, phasing of the ASP requires any commercial development to occur prior to further residential development. Next slide. And resort accommodation and spa are both commercial uses in the Silvertip Village Core Direct Control District. However, administration does have a few concerns with the commercial use of resort accommodation. And just to note that resort accommodation, we do not have any resort accommodation developments yet in the town of Canmore. They're either strictly hotels like visitor accommodation, residential, or they are residential with a tourist home designation. So this would be the first development of this type within the town of Canmore. And so we are recommending the registration of a restrictive covenant to address 2 things. The restrictive covenant would address 1, it would secure the commercial use that's required by the phasing of the area structure plan, but it also would secure the town of Canmore in being able to obtain that commercial taxation piece. So the applicant also is proposing a strata subdivision to help address the commercial component, and the strata subdivision would come at later phases. And that phase would be once the building is built, because it's a volumetric type of subdivision when you do strata. So that would be quite far down the road. The subdivision is consistent with the land use bylaw. In particular, this is the Silvertip Village Core Direct Control District. These are uses that are listed in this district. Council would be the first decision authority on the first resort accommodation application in the village core. So this would come back to council for decision following subdivision. There are no minimum or maximum lot sizes, and there are no development setbacks specified by the district. So these would be subject to council at the time of development permit application. Next slide, please. The offsite levies, we would have them paid at development permit stage at the time of development agreement, not at subdivision, because we don't know how many units of resort accommodation would be applied for. So that would be done at development permit. Next slide, please. For municipal reserve contribution, the MGA allows us to take up to 10% land for MR. The applicant is proposing to defer MR contributions to the remainder of Block 3. so that it would be accommodated within the future village core area. Next slide, please. With shallow utilities, these have been not shown to be designed to meet EDCG, and we would require them to be that way, or they would need to provide something else to our satisfaction at detailed design. And at circulation, and shallow utility providers just said that they would like to make sure that all of their utilities are in a URW plan and that it's registered at the time of endorsement. Next slide, please. Trails gets a little more complex, so I did have some illustrations to help show what the applicant is proposing and what administration is proposing. So this is the applicant's proposal, and what you can see is the orange line is the addition of a trail from the existing trail over to this side, realigning some of the trail in the blue and adding a new sidewalk in the gray dotted line through Silvertip Village Lane. Administration feels that there's much better trail connections that we could get at this stage for this development. Next slide, please, Jane. So we are proposing instead that because the town of Canmore is being asked to accept Silvertip Trail as a public road, that you can see in the black line, that would be asphalt pavement, asphalt pathway to our current EDCG standard, which would go up to the clubhouse. Also the addition of a new natural path, which is almost existing in its current location. It would just need to be brought up to EDCG standards, and it's labeled there natural path. We're also proposing at this subdivision that there is no sidewalk in the upper section, and there is the proper sidewalk on the southern section as suggested earlier. Next slide, please, Jane. And then at future stages of subdivision, what we would look at getting is where I've said no sidewalk before, we would put in a new asphalt multi-use path. And I'm sorry I don't have the highlighter. I was hoping to circle where I'm pointing at right now. But 2 new asphalt paths, and also on top of the water loop, which is the emergency access. So this would be the final path layout at later stages. Next slide, please, Jane. The last thing to cover is wildfire. And there was a wildfire risk assessment prepared and submitted. And so as a condition of subdivision, we would be looking for completion of any fire smart activities like vegetation management, and also structural mitigations at development permit and building permit stages. Next slide, please, Jane. So this subdivision was referred in accordance with the MGA. We sent letters to all of the agencies required under the Act. There were no concerns or objections raised. We did get letters back from the utility companies noting registrations of URW plans and agreements. Next slide. We did receive many responses within the allotted time. We send letters to them and say, can you please respond by this date? We did get a lot of responses back, and they have all been provided for your consideration in attachment 4. Primarily, these concerns were regarding the commencement of commercial development. Next slide, please. So there are some alternatives that the subdivision authority could consider. One would be to refuse the subdivision, stating its reasons for refusal. And the second alternative would be to approve the subdivision with conditions and or reasons other than listed in the Schedule A, which is attachment 5. Next slide, please, Jane. So just to go back to my recommendation is that the subdivision authority approve this application subject to the conditions. And now, Jane, you can just flip through the next couple of screens. I have put all of the conditions on the screen for you and the reasons. I'm not going to go through each one, but should there be any questions on any particular Schedule A condition, we can go use the slide for referral purposes as we're talking about it. And keep going, Jane. There should be 15 conditions. There's a lot of conditions in this subdivision. Oh, sorry, there's 19. And so just to point out, the last thing is advisory notes, that the commencement of commercial development on Block 3 must proceed prior to the commencement of residential development on Block 10. So that's just advisory to the applicant for the Block 10 residential subdivision that is also in front of administration at this point in time. We're processing that application. Next slide. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a few. Don't know where to start, but let's start with the fire, because you just talked about that a moment ago. So it's noted that the emergency access wouldn't be built initially, or would come on later on. And yet this area is noted in the wildfire risk assessment as being high and extreme. So can you talk about the decision to not require an emergency access to the northwest until a later date?
Yeah, sure. So we generally follow the NFPA 1141 standards, as well as the City of Calgary emergency access standards. And in both of those, they say when either an emergency access or a second public access is required. And it usually requires above 200 residential units and or a certain amount of commercial. This does not meet those requirements as of yet. So if we're following those standards, the emergency access would not need to be provided until later stages of density in the village core.
Okay. So I assume then that the expectations with the limited number of units and so relatively limited number of people there, if a wildfire should strike, it would be reasonable to expect that all of the people could get out of that area. Is that what rationalizes that?
That's the rationale, yes.
Okay, and another sort of general question. The land that's just north of the subdivision, is that also, well, clearly it's also quite steep. In the future, would that land be available for more development, or is that not likely?
Yes, so there's the steep slope immediately above, well, like the gully and a steep slope. Above that, there's another piece of flat land, which is the area for the development of the rest of the resort core, the Italian village. So if you look at the area structure plan, in the appendices, there is the resort village design guidelines. So there's potential layouts there for what the resort core could look like.
I see, and that was kind of the thrust of my curiosity, is if that land is, the land remaining is sufficient for the development of the village that was envisioned in the area structure plan in 2007.
Yes, and if you look at those design guidelines, you can see where this area of the resort accommodation was proposed to be built later phases. They've brought it first instead of the rest of the resort core, but it is one of the identified kind of products that would come out of the village core.
Great. Thank you. Looking for other questions from members of council. I have questions from the appendices that might be, I don't know if you'd rather I ask them or we ask them of you, Ms. Wojtenko, or Mr. Calder, or anyone?
I guess if you're directing it towards, it's an administration question, if you would like to know how we're proposing to, because most utility things would be taken on by administration, so we would want it to meet our standards. I think direct it to administration first, and then should we feel that we need to direct it to the applicant, we can.
Great, thank you. One other question, it's also related to fire, and from the report that you provided. So on page 6 of the report, there's some information around wildfire. It notes the report provides recommendations for structural mitigations, which will be considered in the development permit stage. So the recommendation in 3.1 of wildfire risk assessment is is to require use of fire-rated and fire-resistant exterior building materials for all structures. Now, that's not specified in the conditions, is so.
That wouldn't be a condition of subdivision. That would be a condition of the development permit, which would come forward when they have a plan for the actual buildings, and that would be, council would be the approval authority for that. It's not a condition of subdivision.
Okay, so that is a more stringent requirement than is currently in the land use bylaw. So,
It currently is, yes.
so at the time of development, we would be, the developer would be required to develop to a standard higher than the land use bylaw dictates.
The land use, yeah, you can. Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure of that. I am looking up from time to time to see if anybody has a question. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you, Ms. Wojtenko, for your presentation. So my question has to do with some of the public feedback that we received as part of the package. Most of the feedback tends to be around a concern that what's being built is residential and out of sequence as is required through their ASP. Could you comment on that more elaborately?
Sorry, so your question is, and sorry, you're very quite quiet, Joanna. So I just want to make sure I heard the question.
I know, unusual, isn't it?
Is that better?
Oh, that's way better. Now I can hear you.
Yeah, I have no earbuds in. So my question is around the commentary that we received at the back of the package. Much of it seems to be, although some speaks to the ASP itself, much has to do with the sequence of development and a misunderstanding perhaps as to what's being proposed as part of the subdivision. There seems to be a misunderstanding in terms of they understand it to be residential that's being proposed as opposed to resort accommodation. So for those that may be watching at home, I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a bit more.
Sure. So in the land use bylaw, there's a number of permitted and discretionary uses. And some of those are residential in nature and some are commercial in nature. The resort accommodation TSMV is a permitted use, and it's stated to be a commercial use in our land use bylaw. Going by that rationale, this would be commercial development prior to residential development.
Excellent. So this resort accommodation, how does it differ from, I always get the two mixed up, vacation accommodation? No,
Visitor accommodation.
Visitor accommodation, sorry.
Yeah, so I don't have the definition pulled up right in front of me, but I could if we needed it. Visitor accommodation, it generally refers to hotels. So in that definition, we refer to short-term stays only, and there's a maximum time limit of, I believe it's 30 days for people to stay in a visitor accommodation. It's very clearly a commercial use. Resort accommodation in their land use bylaw states that it is a commercial use. However, it doesn't give a maximum time limitation on how long someone can stay in that home. So it has the feeling more that it could be a residential use,
Right.
But it is supposed to be commercial only.
Excellent. The other question I had left me. So I'll look to my colleagues to fill in the space.
Yeah, well, you think about that and I'll jump to my next question. So it has to do with the style of operation, the strata resort accommodation under strata title, which is, as you've noted, new for Canmore. So in the subdivision summary report, the top of page 5, it talks about a central reservation system and hospitality service, housekeeping, garbage, etc., shall be administered through the resort. This might be something that Mr. Calder would like to jump in on. I'm just looking for more detail about how the reservation system and hospitality service will function, and also curious a bit about the strata title approach, and it's detailed in the the memo from Bennett Jones, Appendix D. So, Mr. Kelder or Ms. Anderson, somebody wants to just walk us through how the system works.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's Jason Kelder here with Stone Creek. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So, our vision for this subdivision is to create a series of purpose-built short-term rental accommodation to support our ongoing resort operations at Stone Creek, at Silvertip. Sorry. In other places I've worked, we've had purpose-built smaller units that would rent to golf groups, wedding visitors, meeting guests, those sorts of things. And this is what we're intending to build here. Other than this year, we do a vigorous wedding business at Silvertip, and families want to stay on property, want to stay close to the venue. They enjoy the seclusion and the views at Silvertip, and this is what this accommodation type will provide. It's a little bit more intimate than a hotel down a hall, and like I say, in other resort environments, master plan resort communities like Silvertip, this type of accommodation is quite common. And in terms of how it's booked typically through a central reservation system at the resort, and the resort would accommodate the coming and going of those staying there. So, valet, check-in, housekeeping, any waste management, all of that stuff would be handled through the resort. And that's our intent with this subdivision. Now, the future proposed or envisioned strata subdivision is basically an airspace division of property without creating a condominium. We haven't brought that forward yet, as pointed out, but that is one option that we would consider to create different titles within the lots. The other alternative would be a condo. But the difference is that a strata does not have the same, doesn't follow the Alberta Condo Act, and so the power of a condo to change the use is much more limited, but it still gives people an affirmed title of their space if they were to purchase it. Strata is much more common in commercial than it is in residential. That's another reason we are looking at it. But again, we haven't brought forward a strata subdivision at this point. Okay. But that's our intent to break it up down the road. Hope that answers your question.
It's helping a little bit. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, but so we have experience with visitor comm in the Canassus Way district, for instance, which was meant to be managed by a central, essentially like a hotel desk, and bookings through the primary operator and all of that. And it seems that over time there have been many situations where individual unit owners have bypassed the reservation system and have been using Airbnb and renting out the units on Airbnb. So is that something that's controlled better through
Yeah, so our intent is to limit that. I mean, the purpose of these units is to support the resort activity within Silvertip. So packaging golf or wedding or other uses based on the current and future offerings at Silvertip. It's our intention to set this up with an owner registered covenant that prevents individuals from renting these out outside of the rental management. And because it's not a condo, or not proposed to be a condo, that would be set up prior to the first transaction, and that would make it binding on all future owners. Rental management agreements are much more durable if they're put in place prior to the first transaction. Most of the failures of rental management agreements on projects where people remove them or try to rent them independently have all been usually traced back to a post-purchase plan.
Great. Thanks for that detail. And you indicated that you're not certain you'll be moving forward with that approach, or it might be a different management approach.
No, our intent is to rent and manage them through a centralized Silvertip or assigned rental management company.
Okay, thank you.
But all of them through one, not independently.
Right, great. Thank you for that. I just have a question that's sparked by one of the comments from communication from a member of the public, and I wanted to clarify the question, and it's the letter from Ms. Etherton, who suggests that there's been no environmental impact studies done. And my understanding, recollection is that EIAs were done on the land some time ago. Is that accurate, Ms. Wojtenko?
Thank you. When the Silvertip ASP was, I mean, this land does have a lot of history of previous approvals. There is the master plan that was done in the 1990s. Previous to that, there was other studies. So yes, there has been extensive environmental studies done on this land. And at the time of the adoption of the ASP in 2007, there were a couple areas of land slated for development. For example, Block 10, which is the residential development. That's also being considered right now. There is a requirement for further environmental review because the lands are adjacent to the wildlife corridor, but the environmental review was narrow in focus, just to effects on the wildlife corridor.
Okay, thank you. Are there councillors that have questions? Councillor Seeley?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Under administration concerns with freehold titles, wondering if the restricted covenants would not cover that off.
Councillor Seeley, thank you. I just want to clarify the question. Do you mean the concern with it remaining as a commercial use? Administration concern, so recommendation for registration of a restrictive covenant?
Yeah, and there's a concern about freehold titles, but with the restricted covenant, that should alleviate those concerns. Yes, that's why we are recommending, and we have put that forward to our legal counsel as well, of what mechanism would be used, and a restrictive covenant for a commercial use is what is being recommended for the town of Canmore. Thank you.
Are there other questions from members of council at this time? Okay, if there are no questions, and I see none. Does the applicant have anything they'd like to speak to or add to the discussion? Mr. Calder, do you have?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't believe so. I believe I believe we can satisfy all the conditions through detailed design submission. We're excited to start this first commercial, or the next commercial advancement here at Silvertip, and hopefully this will be a trigger to greater advancements on the commercial side at Silvertip.
Okay, thank you very much. I will move that the subdivision authority go in camera. Call the question on that. Those in favor? Opposed? So will you be able to set up a break room or let us know when we're in camera?
I just opened a breakout room.
Okay, I believe we're all back in the public meeting. So at this time, I will move that the subdivision authority approve SB 2019-010, subject to the conditions in Schedule A. I would also like to note the reasons for decision for the record. The proposed subdivision is consistent with the regulations of Land Use Bylaw 2018-22. Site access is adequate and from public roads. The proposed parcels will be served by municipal services. The topography and soil characteristics are appropriate for development. Impacts of flooding, subsidence, or erosion of land can be adequately mitigated. Stormwater collection and disposal is adequate. The proposed use of the subject lands is compatible with the adjacent uses. The subject subdivision is suitable for the purposes intended. An adequate municipal reserve is provided by way of deferred reserve caveat. And I note the advisory note that commencement of commercial development on Block 3 must proceed prior to the commencement of residential development on Block 10. Speaking to the motion, I'll support the motion. The reasons for decision noted that the plan is consistent with Land Use Bylaw 2018-22, but I also would note that the plan is also consistent with the Canmore Municipal Development Plan as well as the Silvertip Area Structure Plan. So the subdivision is consistent with all of our informing documents. I'm pleased to see some commercial development commencing in Silvertip lands. I think that's very important for moving forward with the delivery of the area structure plan, and I will support the motion. Other discussion on the motion? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I too will support subdivision on the reasons that you listed. I also agree that it is in alignment with the area structure plan. I understand that there are some residents of Silvertip that have been quite anxious to see more movement on the area structure plan. And based on the feedback that we received, I believe that this is in the proper sequence and that this is an important step for the ASP.
Councillor Seeley.
I'm happy to support this application and see Silvertip move forward with commercial resort accommodations and resort development. It's been a long time coming and I'm happy to support this.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I believe with that, I will move that the subdivision authority be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.